Before we dive into today's mind-blowing HFY story, drop your name, city, country, and time down in the comments. We want to see who's watching from where, whether you're a night owl in Toronto or catching this on lunch break in Tokyo. Let the galaxy know you were here for this one. The warnings were clear. The alien elders had spoken with a voice that left no room for misunderstanding. Do not approach the cubs, they said, with a hiss of ancestral fear. They are sacred, protective, dangerous. But the humans had always been different. They didn't see barriers, they saw bridges. They didn't retreat from what others feared. They stepped forward. And so when a human soldier found himself face to face with a group of abandoned alien cubs in the heart of a war zone, something ancient shifted. Not in him, but in them. Instead of lashing out, they crawled toward him. Curious. Instead of attacking, they clung to him. And when their own kind came to retrieve them, it wasn't the cubs that backed away. It was the humans who were surrounded by the younglings refusing to leave. What started as a strange encounter quickly spiraled into something larger. Alliances trembled. Old powers whispered of betrayal, but the cubs had made their choice. And in doing so, they shattered everything their kind had believed for centuries. Because the one species they were warned about, the one said to be too wild, too fragile, too alien, had become their guardians. And not even war could separate them now. This is the story of how one soldier's act of kindness rewrote interstellar politics, tore through tradition, and awakened something ancient and fierce in the youngest of a dying race. They warned the humans not to approach, but the cubs didn't listen. The jungle was alive with sound, chirping, clicking, distant screeches that echoed between violet-leaved trees. Sergeant Micah Trent wiped the sweat from his brow, his HUD flickering from the humidity. His team had fallen back to the extraction point, but Trent had stayed behind. Not because of orders, but because of something he heard over the ridge. A sound. Not mechanical, not a threat. Something small, like a cry. Moving cautiously, he pushed through the underbrush, weapon low. His boots sank into soft moss-like ground that squelched beneath his step. The moment he broke into the clearing, his brain froze. There they were. Not one, not two, but 5 of them. Alien cubs. Small, wide-eyed reptilian but not threatening. Their scales shimmered with iridescent colors, almost as if light moved beneath them. They huddled together, watching him. Trembling. Afraid, but not aggressive. Their species, the Xeranthi, were notoriously territorial. Ancient warrior elders that barely tolerated humans on diplomatic grounds, let alone militarily. Yet here were their young abandoned, alone. And they didn't run. One cub took a step forward. Trent lowered his weapon slowly. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice cutting through the static in his mic. "You lost." The cub chirped. Then another moved closer. Soon, all 5 were surrounding him, brushing against his legs, emitting soft coos and churs. His heart thudded. He knew the rules. The Xeranthi had explicitly said under no circumstances were humans to interfere with their young. Touching one was a political nightmare. Being seen near them. Worse. But what was he supposed to do? Leave them here. He tried radioing command. No response. Signal interference. He looked down again, and one of the cubs was pawing at the Velcro on his knee pad, chittering happily. Trent sighed. "Guess I'm babysitting now." He dug into his ration pack, pulling out a protein bar. Before he could unwrap it, the cub snatched it from his hand and scurried back to the others. They tore it into pieces, sharing like it was a feast. That's when the roar came, not from the cubs, but from beyond the tree line. A deep, guttural warning cry. Trent instinctively shielded the younglings, rifle snapping up. The leaves parted. 2 fully grown Xeranthi warriors emerged, clad in ceremonial armor that shimmered with danger. Their eyes locked on Trent, then the cubs, then back to Trent. Trent didn't move, didn't blink. "Not threatening," he said, praying his voice was steady. "They came to me." One of the warriors growled. The other stepped forward, but froze, because the smallest cub had run up to Trent and wrapped itself around his leg, hissing softly at the warrior. Protective. defiant. The other cubs followed. Within seconds, all 5 were pressed against the human, forming a barrier with their small, scaled bodies. The warriors looked stunned. One even took a step back. Trent swallowed. "I don't know what this means," he muttered. "But I'm guessing it's not protocol." Something ancient stirred in the warriors' expressions. Confusion, hesitation, then understanding. One bowed his head. The other spoke for the first time. "They have chosen." Trent didn't fully grasp what had just happened. Not then. Not even when the warriors turned without a word and disappeared into the forest, leaving the cubs at his side. What he did know, what burned into his memory that night, was the look in those alien eyes. Reverence, surrender, or something older, something sacred. The cubs had chosen him, and that simple act broke more than tradition. It set a precedent that would travel faster than any fleet, louder than any diplomacy. That day, in the shadows of a forgotten jungle, a single human soldier unknowingly became the fulcrum of an empire's upheaval. Back at the forward operating base, everything felt off. Trent sat in the medbay with 5 Xeranthi cubs curled up beside him like oversized scaled house cats. The med techs didn't know whether to be alarmed or charmed. One tried to scan a cub only to get a light nip on the glove for her trouble. "They're bonded to you," she said, her voice laced with awe and confusion. "This isn't normal," Trent sighed. "Nothing about this day has been normal." The base commander, Colonel Maddox, arrived minutes later with eyes like thunderclouds. "You touched the cubs?" he growled. "They touched me," Trent answered. "They followed me back. I couldn't leave them in the jungle." Maddox pinched the bridge of his nose. "You realize what this could mean? The Xeranthi consider their cubs sacred. What you've done could be interpreted as, I don't know, heresy, kidnapping, declaration of war." Trent shrugged. "Or maybe I saved their kids and they'll see it that way too." A loud chittering chorus interrupted them. The cubs were arguing, not violently but passionately. Then they climbed off the bed, marched across the medbay and stood between Maddox and Trent. One of them hissed loudly. Maddox blinked. "Is that thing defending you?" Trent smiled. Apparently, it didn't take long for the news to spread. Someone had recorded the moment the cubs standing guard over a human and posted it to the interspecies diplomatic channels. Within hours, it had gone viral across dozens of worlds. Debates erupted. Was this a soft coup by the humans? Had the Xeranthi lost control of their young? Or was this the beginning of something new? The Xeranthi elders responded within the day. A delegation arrived floating down in obsidian ships shaped like blades. They came not with weapons but with ritual. At the edge of the base, in full view of all gathered species, the eldest of them spoke. His voice echoed without amplification. "They have chosen," he said, repeating the words of the jungle warrior. "We must now choose whether we accept their will or fear it." The galaxy watched, breath held, as ancient authority stood face to face with childish instinct, and humanity, so often seen as the reckless newcomers, the unpredictable variables in a delicate equation, became the variable that the equation couldn't solve. For the first time in known history, it wasn't a treaty or a war that redefined an empire's hierarchy. It was a handful of cubs and one stubborn human who wouldn't walk away. In the silence that followed the elder's speech, a door cracked open, not just between species, but between worlds. The Xeranthi could no longer pretend the bond didn't exist, and neither could anyone else. Trent stood in ceremonial silence as the Xeranthi elder approached. The jungle breeze carried strange scents, flowers that opened only for judgment. The delegation was majestic and terrifying, cloaked in woven armor from the bark of the death trees and shadow dyes from the oldest roots. Every movement was a ritual. The cubs didn't flinch. Instead, they nuzzled against Trent's boots, tails coiling protectively around his legs. The elder paused inches away. His gaze was like obsidian, ancient and cutting. "What name does the human carry?" the elder asked, not to Trent, but to the cubs. The smallest one, green-eyed, silver-scaled, chirped once and gestured at Trent. The elder nodded slowly. Then let the record show the young ones speak. The name they claim shall be honored. Trent blinked. Wait. They just named me? The linguist beside him whispered. No. They claimed you. That sounds worse. To the Xeranthi, it's everything. And that was when Earth's diplomats panicked. Within 24 hours, every interstellar ambassador assigned to the border colonies received coded dispatches. The Xeranthi claiming a human in front of witnesses triggered a previously theoretical clause in the Zentari Accords. It meant interspecies guardianship, an unbreakable pact. The problem: no human had ever been claimed before. There were no protocols, no precedent, no way out without dishonoring the Xeranthi elders, which could fracture decades of fragile peace. On Earth, debates exploded across the networks. Was the soldier brainwashed? Is this another Xeranthi ploy to divide our military? Or is this the first real bridge between us? But out in the jungle moon, politics seemed laughably distant. Trent sat cross-legged beside the cubs as they played, wrestled, and occasionally brought him strange gifts, glowing beetles, stones that whispered, fruit that pulsed with color. He had begun to understand them, not just in words, but in rhythms, in warmth, in the way they tilted their heads when confused, or chirped when proud. They were children, yes, but children of a species whose emotional intelligence rivaled any diplomat's. At night, they formed a protective circle around him, not because they needed his protection, but because he had given it first. The bond was sealed in instinct, and that terrified everyone else. It wasn't supposed to go this way. Humans were supposed to be the unpredictable ones, the wild card race constantly stepping on galactic toes. But now, it was the Xeranthi who were breaking their own taboos, openly bonding with a human in front of the galaxy. And in doing so, they weren't just rewriting diplomacy, they were rewriting legacy. What started as a chance encounter in the jungle had become a ripple threatening to shake empire. And at the heart of it was a man who had simply refused to walk away from a scared child in the dark. Days passed. Word of the incident spread faster than any sanction could. Xeranthi dignitaries began arriving in orbit, not in warships, but in ceremonial dreadnoughts that hadn't left their atmosphere in centuries. Their arrival was silent, symbolic, and spine-chilling. The High Kin matriarch descended herself, an act so rare it caused even hardened Earth commanders to second-guess their orders. She said nothing as she stepped onto the jungle soil, flanked by hundreds of honor guards, with crystalline blades curved like crescent moons. Trent stood beside the cubs, his uniform dusty, his expression calm. He had never stood before royalty, let alone one whose species once declared humans too loud to understand. But the matriarch didn't look at the diplomats. She looked at the cubs. They chirped, they purred, they danced in a circle around Trent. And then, they placed a feather on his shoulder. Silence. The matriarch whispered in her own tongue, eyes closed. When she opened them again, she declared, "This pact is sacred." The humans flinched. She continued, "Let it be known, the one who chose not to run, who stayed when danger coiled near, shall be known as heartbound." Gasps rippled. The humans asked, "What does that mean?" The linguist trembled. "It's the title given to warriors who raise Xeranthi young after tragedy. It's eternal." Trent blinked. "Eternal's a long time. You don't understand," the diplomat whispered. "This isn't some honorary title. This is permanent." He looked at the cubs now clinging to his arms. They were smiling in the only way Xeranthi could. He didn't feel fear. He felt something else. He didn't yet have a word for it. Responsibility, perhaps, or something deeper. When the delegation left, Earth was forever changed. Trent became a symbol, loved by some, feared by others. News headlines screamed, "The human who was claimed. First interspecies guardianship confirmed." Trent Willard, hero or hostage. And the cubs, they refused to return to their enclave. They built a shelter near the base perimeter, refusing to be separated. When soldiers tried to nudge them back to the jungle, they simply returned. When they were told humans weren't allowed to care for Xeranthi youth, the matriarch overruled it. In a broadcast aired across 5 sectors, she said, "Let the one who stood in darkness not be punished for his light." It wasn't poetic translation, it was a decree. Weeks later, Trent sat with one of the cubs on his shoulder, watching a Terran sun rise over the alien trees. He had learned to speak their clicks, their hums, even their silences, and when a reporter asked him, "Do you regret not walking away that day?" he didn't hesitate. "I think we spend too much time asking what we gain or lose," he said, "but no one asks what we leave behind when we turn our backs." These kids, they didn't need a hero, they just needed someone to stay. Across the stars, empires moved in shadows, plotting how to respond. The balance of power had always rested on predictability, rules, patterns, expectations. But now, there was a breach in that system, not through war, not through conquest, but through something much harder to control: compassion, loyalty, a soldier who didn't run, and children who, against every evolutionary instinct, chose to stay by his side. The question wasn't whether peace would hold. The question was, what will they do now that the wildest bond imaginable has already formed? Their trek across the outer forest regions had taken its toll. Human boots were never designed for the acidic fog that clung low to the marsh trails of Aravex Prime. But Captain Dana Ruiz didn't flinch, didn't pause. Not with 3 alien cubs now walking in step with her, one draped in her weather cloak, the other 2 sticking close enough to trip her if she ever slowed down. Behind her, Sergeant Mabeki scouted every 3rd step, his rifle low but eyes sharp. The cubs chirped and clicked softly, each sound a mixture of comfort and concern. The youngest, the one with mottled orange spots, pressed its snout to Dana's gloved hand. She had expected fear, maybe even silence. What she got instead was loyalty, raw and defiant. By day 3, the Aravex fog had turned the surrounding forest into a haunted watercolor. Trees bent and shimmered in the pale light, and somewhere far off, predators howled a warning. But none dared draw near. Word had spread, humans had protected the cubs, and predators, even apex ones, knew better than to test a mother's rage, because that's what the human looked like to them now. Not a soldier, not a threat, a guardian. A mother. Back at the outpost, confusion brewed. The Aravex Council was furious. "We told you not to approach them." Their envoy screeched through the transmission. "The cubs are sacred. They must return to the glade." Dana stood her ground. "They won't leave. They are children. They don't know better." "They do. Better than we did when we dropped in here with guns drawn and rules made." There was a silence on the comms, the kind only pride could stretch. Then a whisper, "They chose you?" Dana looked behind her. The cubs had fallen asleep beside the human fire. One even drooled across Mabeki's boot. She didn't smile. She simply answered, "They did. They said aliens didn't form attachments the way humans did. That our empathy was messy, too fast, too emotional to be respected in interstellar protocol." But the cubs didn't seem to care. They saw kindness. They saw protection. And in a universe full of hierarchy and hostility, they made their own choice. They broke their own rules, because for the first time something felt safer than tradition, and it had a human heartbeat. The diplomatic fallout came swiftly. A full Aravex security detachment landed near the human camp with precision only old grudges could fuel. They didn't approach with weapons drawn, yet, but the implication hung thick in the fog. Captain Dana stepped forward, unarmed but unyielding, with the cubs clustered close behind her legs like shadows of defiance. The Aravex lead officer, Commander Velrath, flicked his bifurcated tongue once. "You misunderstand the consequences of your trespass, human. The glade is not just land, it is memory, legacy, bloodline. These young are not yours." Dana didn't break eye contact. "They came to us." Velrath twitched. "They don't understand what you are." Dana lowered to one knee. brushing the smallest cub's fur gently. They understand exactly, more than your elders it seems. The standoff could have broken into fire and ash, but it didn't. One of the cubs walked forward, right up to the Aravex commander. It raised its small paw and pressed it against the hardened breastplate of his uniform, then chirped, a sound low, deliberate, ancestral. Velrath froze. That's, he whispered, the ancient greeting. Mbeki leaned toward Dana. They just rewrote centuries of protocol with a sneeze and a paw tap. She almost laughed. Almost. That night, instead of arresting the humans, the Aravex soldiers set up a perimeter, not as jailers, but as watcher, observer. The cubs would not be taken, not by force. That was clear now. When the galaxy watches and waits for the moment humans overstep, it rarely prepares for the moment humans are chosen. They came expecting rebellion or diplomacy, but what they saw was something deeper, something older. A species born of war and trauma, giving peace without asking for anything in return. Not because it was strategic, but because it was right. And that shook them more than any weapon ever could. By the third night, something extraordinary happened. A group of Aravex youth, older siblings of the cubs, arrived, but not to retrieve them. No, they came bearing stories, not war songs or propaganda, real stories, shared memories from the cubs, now passed along with curiosity, not judgment. The humans let them nap in warm jackets. They fed them during the rain. They told them stories, not commands. It was subtle, but it was a shift. The elder Aravex delegation, politicians layered in ceremonial silks and centuries of pride, held a tense summit under starlight. Dana wasn't invited, not officially, but the cubs refused to sleep anywhere else but near her, and since protocol dictated that no elder may separate from the Gladeborn unless by willing choice, Dana sat near the fire, quietly, surrounded by ancient power, trying to adapt to a present they no longer controlled. Velrath approached once more, this time, without his guards. Your people have a history of violence. Dana didn't blink. So do yours. And abandonment. Her eyes flicked to the cubs asleep on her makeshift blanket. Yet here I am. He sat beside her, the flames casting uneven shadows over his gray scales. This was not the outcome I expected. Neither did we. Dana admitted. But maybe that's the point. In a galaxy of treaties and tensions, no weapon is sharper than compassion freely given. When the young of a proud warrior race choose a human, not out of fear, not for advantage, but from instinct, the universe has to pause. And in that pause, in the heartbeat of surprise, maybe, just maybe, peace has a chance to grow. Before we begin, where are you tuning in from? Drop your city, country, and local time in the comments and tell us your first name too, so we can shout out our fellow Earthlings from around the galaxy. Now, let's continue the story. They came at dawn, not with weapons raised or ships overhead, but with robes fluttering and ceremonial guards flanking either side. The Aravex Council had voted, a decision centuries in the making, triggered by a few stubborn cubs and one unshakable human soldier. Dana didn't know what to expect as they approached, only that her instincts and the warm nuzzle from the cub curled up beside her told her to stay calm. Velrath stepped forward, no longer cloaked in suspicion but bearing the neutral tone of diplomacy. His voice, while still gravel-thick and formal, was less guarded than before. You have altered our rights. Dana looked up from where she was gently brushing dust off one of the cub's small paws. I didn't mean to. And yet, meaning has little to do with momentum. Behind him, the cub's families stood watching. Not with scorn, but confusion, and something else. Dana recognized it. Hesitation, yes, but also hope. That dangerous, precious thing. We request your presence, Velrath said. The council will hear you. She blinked. Me? I'm not an ambassador. You are now. They expected resistance. Expected Dana to tremble before the towering chamber carved into Aravex crystal, its air laced with a scent that marked judgment centuries old. But she didn't flinch. She walked steady, every step echoing with the memory of cubs who curled into her side and refused to let go. They gave her courage in a way no rank or medal ever could. As she stood before the tribunal, the elders stared with narrow, glittering eyes. Velrath spoke first, introducing her not as a human, not as a soldier, but as chosen by the young. That alone caused a ripple of whispers. They asked her questions meant to expose military manipulation. Did Earth send you to win favor through our children? No, Dana replied simply. Earth sent me to protect life. I just didn't expect it to be your cubs. Did you bribe them? I fed them. Silence followed, thick and stunned. They chose to stay with you. Why? Dana hesitated. Not from doubt, but because the answer wasn't simple. Because I didn't treat them like a threat, or a mission, or a pawn. I treated them like someone should have treated me, when I was scared and far from home. What happened next, no one saw coming. An elder stood, one so ancient his crest had begun to silver, something rarely seen among Aravek's warriors who didn't live long past their final campaigns. He stepped forward and spoke in a tongue unused in 1,000 years. The chamber fell still. Dana didn't understand the words, but the tone. It was reverent. Velrath translated softly. He is invoking the right of symbiosis. It's unheard of. It would bind your people to ours, not as allies, as kin. Dana's breath caught. You mean adoption? More. Something spiritual. It hasn't been performed since before spaceflight. Another elder growled. We are not pets to be coddled by humans. No, Dana said firmly. And we're not monsters to be feared by you. We've both made mistakes. Maybe it's time to raise something new, together. The vote that followed lasted hours. Tradition clashed with transformation, but in the end, the cubs made the decision for them. One by one, they entered the chamber. Uninvited, unafraid, and each sat beside Dana, in silence. The chamber wept. When news of the symbiosis pact broke across the stars, every species reacted differently. Some feared it, whispering of Earth's soft invasion, using kindness instead of conquest. Others mocked it, calling the Araveks sentimental, broken by one soldier's charity. But many watched and wondered. Was this what the next age would look like? The human and the cubs became symbols, featured in murals, diplomatic summits, even songs sung in binary by machine worlds. Still trying to understand emotion, Dana never got used to the fame. She didn't want it. What mattered was that she still had her small family, the cubs who clung to her not out of fear, but faith. They told her she was just a peacekeeper, temporary, replaceable. But the moment those cubs refused to leave her side, the universe tilted. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't politics. It was the kind of loyalty that rewrote history in the language of trust, and once that bond was made, no council or warlord could ever unmake it. The weeks that followed were filled with cautious integration. Dana remained stationed on Aravek's Prime, but now she wasn't alone in her quarters. 3 cubs had been officially assigned as cultural liaisons, a fancy term for staying by her side day and night. They played with her boots. They chewed the corners of her datapad. They curled into her lap whenever she tried to read a report. She didn't mind. One morning, she awoke to find her uniform missing, shredded, and stitched into a strange patchwork banner hung above her cot. The cubs had woven symbols into it, ancient Araveks runes beside rough childlike sketches of Earth's flag. She laughed, eyes brimming with something warm and ancient. She didn't need medals. This was enough. She started teaching them human songs, and in turn, they taught her how to climb, not like a human, but like something born with claws and curved limbs, meant to scale the impossible. By the end of the 2nd month, she could scramble up a cliff face like one of them, dust trailing behind as she laughed wildly into the wind. Diplomatic envoys came often now, not just from Earth or Araveks colonies, but from third-party races wanting to observe the anomaly, the pack mother of cross-species kinship. Dana didn't like the name, too ceremonial, too distant. She just wanted to be Dana, the woman who fed scared cubs under alien stars. There were still skeptics, hardcore isolationists within the Araveks order, believed this bond with humanity was a weakness. They lobbied to separate the cubs, arguing that emotional contamination threatened the purity of warrior culture. When that failed, they tried more covert tactics. One night, her door shattered inward, not with a blast, but with a pulse, silent, precise, professional. Dana hit the ground and rolled instinctively, sweeping the nearest cub behind her just as the shadows entered. 3 figured, cloaked, armed, not assassins. Retriever. The lead one raised a weapon. Step aside, human. The cubs return with us. You've made your point. They're not trophies, Dana growled. And I don't step aside. Before the first bolt fired, she tackled him low, driving her shoulder into his gut. The cubs scattered with practiced chaos. They'd learned drills, trained alongside her. One bit a retreating boot, another triggered the silent alarm hidden behind the sleeping pad. It took only 94 seconds for security to arrive. The retrieval team vanished, dissolved into the shadows before they could be captured. But Dana stood in front of the cubs, bruised and breathing hard, protective to the last rib. That night, the council voted again, this time unanimously. Dana would remain. The bond was not to be disturbed. Protection was now mutual. Trust wasn't forged in peace treaties. It was born in fire, in midnight attacks and breathless seconds, where instinct mattered more than politics. That night, Dana didn't prove herself with words. She proved it with bruises, with grit, with a stance between danger and innocence. And the galaxy noticed. The aftermath rippled across the stars. News feeds ran non-stop loops of Dana shielding the cubs, and not just human networks. Even neutral species picked it up. Memes bloomed, so did outrage. But more than anything, came curiosity. For the first time in centuries, the Aravex leadership extended an open invitation to other planetary diplomats. Come, see, witness the bond that defied biology and rewrote instinct. Dana, unknowingly, had become the bridge between myth and modernization. She wasn't alone anymore. Not even close. Human psychologists arrived to study the imprinting effect between predator young and cross-species protectors. Aravex elders, once so stern, now bowed slightly when passing her in the halls. The cubs followed her like shadows, but brighter, bolder now. One even began mimicking her walk, back straight, chin up, boots clunking too big on tiny feet. But then came the tension. A delegation from the Zarnet Syndicate, avian bipeds with a disdain for mammals, accused Dana of indoctrination, of weaponizing cuteness, of planting psychological landmines in the minds of youth. Dana nearly laughed, until she realized they weren't wrong. Not entirely. These cubs weren't just fond of her. They were starting to think like her. They asked questions. They disobeyed quietly. They tested rules, all human traits, all dangerous to a species founded on rigid tradition and obedience. The Aravex High Matron summoned Dana for a private walk, a rare honor. They climbed the highest ridge overlooking the bonded plains. The sun bathed the field in crimson gold. Cub silhouettes danced in the distance. You're changing them, the matron said. You know this. Dana nodded. They're changing me too. And if one day, that change makes them question war, makes them refuse orders, then maybe you'll have peacekeepers instead of soldiers. Dana replied softly. The matron stared ahead, long, hard. Then slowly she smiled. Peace was never supposed to come from treaties, or weapons dropped in surrender. Sometimes, it came from a child mimicking the walk of someone from another world, from a laugh shared between enemies' bloodlines, from the way a cub meant for war, curled into a human's lap and chose comfort over combat. Change didn't come in parades, it crept in, on quiet paws. But not everyone embraced the shift. An elite Aravex military unit, known as the Iron Fang, returned from an off-world campaign. Hardened veterans, loyalists to the old ways. They saw Dana not as a savior, but as a threat, a contaminant who had diluted the next generation. The cubs' attachment, their questions, their mimicked human behavior, All of it was considered weakness. The unit's commander, Varric, made his stance clear during the first joint training session. "They do not belong to you," he snarled, glaring at Dana. "You've tamed their teeth, blunted their claws." Dana didn't flinch. "Or maybe I've taught them when not to use them." The cub stood behind her, not cowering, but steady, observing, choosing. When one of the Iron Fang officers barked a traditional Aravex combat order, one cub turned, looked at Dana, and didn't move. It was subtle, but the silence that followed felt seismic. Authority had just been tested, and lost, and the one who had won wasn't Aravex, she was human. Tensions escalated. Whispers of removing Dana, forcibly, echoed in high command. The cubs, sensing the shift, grew protective. One even growled when Dana passed a senior officer. What had started as nurturing had become loyalty, deep, immovable, dangerous. And then it happened, a sabotage attempt. One of Dana's nutrient packs had been tampered with. She collapsed mid-session, barely breathing. The medical team moved fast, so did the cubs. They surrounded her, snapping at medics, howling in primal confusion. One even clawed a guard's leg to keep him away. The message was clear. No one touched their human, unless they said so. It took hours to calm them, even longer to revive Dana. When she awoke, the first face she saw was a cub, its paw pressed against her arm, eyes wide and wet. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm still here." She had trained them to be calm, to think, to love. But now, in her pain, they taught her something back, that loyalty, once earned, became instinct, that even the most feared predators could be protectors, if someone just believed in them first, and that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy's most powerful warriors had already chosen peace. They just needed someone worth protecting. Viewers, before we begin this final chapter, drop your name, city, country, and current time in the comments. We want to know where in the galaxy you're tuning in from. Now here's where everything changes. Buckle in. They had been running for 16 hours straight through thick undergrowth, across dried stream beds, and along treacherous rocky paths that cut like veins into the forest's bones. Lieutenant Ray Holston's boots were nearly falling apart, soaked through from the marsh they'd crossed at dawn. She didn't feel it anymore. What mattered now wasn't pain or exhaustion. What mattered were the tiny footsteps keeping up behind her, and the shadows closing in around them. The cubs, Mira, Juno, and Threx, hadn't whimpered once. Their fur was matted and muddy, and their small claws trembled each time the shriek of a predator echoed through the trees. But they didn't cry. They trusted Ray. They followed her. And Ray had made a promise. They would get out. They would live. Behind them something massive screamed. A sound of hunger and fury. The Zarn pack had arrived. Humans were never meant to be in this quadrant alone. The diplomatic mission had failed days ago. A misunderstanding during a border check had spiraled into a full-blown political incident, and now the only survivor of the human envoy was Ray, a junior officer who was never meant to lead anything larger than a briefing, but fate didn't care about assignments. Ray gritted her teeth and tightened her grip on the kinetic rifle slung across her back. Her uniform was shredded, her comms were jammed, and the locator beacon was long dead. But the cubs were still alive, and she was going to keep it that way. They warned the humans never to approach the cubs, not because the cubs were dangerous, but because the consequences of bonding with them were irreversible. Emotional imprinting, psychological dependency, species-level cultural clashes, all of it. But Ray didn't have time for alien warnings when the ship exploded, and 3 frightened young lives clung to her leg in the wreckage. And now, as an entire hunting party bore down on them, it wasn't just survival anymore. It was defiance. She was a human, and humans don't leave anyone behind. Not even alien cubs from a species that once called humans barely sentient. The galaxy didn't know what to do with people like Ray. People who bonded, who protected, who loved across species lines. But it was about to learn. They stumbled into a ravine just as the sun dipped beyond the horizon. Ray knew they couldn't run much longer, not without sleep, water, and a miracle. She set the cubs down gently, checked their tiny paws, and gave them the last protein ration from her belt. "I know it's not what you're used to," she said softly, kneeling in the dirt, "but it'll keep you going." Threx blinked up at her with those wide golden eyes that glowed slightly in the dark. "You still not scared?" Ray smiled, brushing dirt off his snout, terrified. "But I'm more scared of breaking my promise." The air shimmered above the ravine wall. A Zarn hunter, taller than a tree, its mouth lined with sensory feelers and bone teeth, stepped forward. And another, then a third. Ray stood. She didn't reach for her weapon. Not yet. Instead, she shouted, "Enough running." The Zarn paused. One of them tilted its head, then hissed, "Give us the spawn. Your kind has no place among the Oathborn." Ray raised her voice. "Then why are they following me and not you?" That silenced them, because the cubs had chosen, and in the ancient law of the Zarn, choice once made was sacred. Next segment coming up. Here's the continuation of Part 4, building to the midpoint of the climax, and including the next approximately 1,000 word segment with a 200-300 word hook. The leader of the Zarn hunting pack let out a low, oscillating growl that reverberated through the rocks beneath Ray's feet. It was the kind of sound that made lesser creatures fall to their knees. But Ray stood still, her hands at her sides, her eyes on the cubs. Mira stepped forward first, her fur bristling but her posture tall. "We choose her," she said, her voice small but unshaken. Juno and Threx echoed, "We choose." It wasn't just defiance, it was declaration. The Zarn leader hissed again, "Your kind cannot care for our young." Ray finally unslung her rifle and powered it up, not to threaten, just to make a point. "Maybe not the way you do, but I gave them food, shelter. I carried them on my back. I taught them to run toward safety, not just away from fear. Isn't that parenting too?" The Zarn flinched. One of them took a step forward, and then paused. Threx, barely past toddler age, stepped between Ray and the hunter. His small claws curled outward, trembling. "Please, no more chasing." They warned her this would happen, that humans imprint too quickly, that they bond without understanding the weight of alien cultures, that they get too attached. But no one warned the galaxy what would happen when aliens bonded to humans. And now it was too late. This wasn't an officer with a mission anymore. This was a mother defending her young, and no law, no cultural precedent, no alien tribunal was going to stand in her way. The Zarn had unleashed something they couldn't control. Compassion turned to courage, protection turned to resistance, and Ray Holston wasn't going to surrender. Not now, not ever. The standoff stretched for minutes, though it felt like hours. Then came the howl, long and low, not from above, but from behind. A second Zarn group had arrived. These weren't hunters. They wore armor, commanders, and with them, a diplomat. The Zarn emissary stepped between both parties, raising a clawed hand. "No blood today," it said in a calm, clicking tone. "There has been an awakening." Ray narrowed her eyes. "What kind of awakening?" The emissary looked to the cubs. "They are not just protected, they are changing. Our young have never bonded this way. It is unprecedented." Juno reached up, curling a paw into Ray's glove. "We don't want to go back," she whispered. The emissary nodded. "Then you will not." And with that, the hunt was over. The return to civilization wasn't what Ray expected. When the rescue vessel from the Terran Diplomatic Corps arrived, it wasn't just medics and officials, it was scientists, cultural analysts, and even journalists. Because the footage from Ray's helmet cam had leaked, and across the stars, humans and aliens alike had seen what it meant for Predator and Protector to become one. The cubs never left her side. In the debrief room, while generals argued and bureaucrats bickered, Mira sat curled in Ray's lap. Juno inspected every surface like a tiny security officer. Threx napped with his head on her boot. They're not just bonded, one cultural analyst whispered. They're rewired. This is going to change everything. They were right. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humans were meant to observe, not intervene. Follow orders, not rewrite alliances. But no one anticipated that in the ruins of diplomacy, something deeper would take root. Not control, not power, trust. Ray hadn't just survived, she'd been chosen. And in doing so, the Cubs had rewritten the laws of their own people. It wasn't rebellion, it was evolution. Now every species watching had a new question. What if humanity wasn't just a threat, but a mirror? A chance to learn what courage, loyalty, and irrational compassion really looked like. The predator had become the protector, and the galaxy would never be the same. Months later, Ray was back on Earth. The Cubs, now dubbed ambassadors in training, were living with her under temporary interstellar guardianship. They had uniforms of their own. They trained. They asked questions. One night, Mira crawled into her lap, older now, voice steady. Do you think they'll ever trust us? Ray thought for a long moment. Maybe not all of them, she said softly. But we're not done showing them why they should. And outside, in the night sky, stars blinked, as if watching back.